Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ignited a wave of international controversy following remarks in which he accused several high-profile Western leaders, namely French President Emmanuel Macron, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, of effectively supporting Hamas and contributing to a global rise in anti-Semitism. His comments, delivered during a press briefing amid growing international scrutiny of Israel's military campaign in Gaza, have been described by critics as inflammatory and divisive. The accusations come at a particularly delicate moment, as humanitarian concerns over the ongoing blockade of Gaza are drawing urgent calls for action from world leaders and international organizations alike. In his statement, Netanyahu strongly condemned what he called the hypocrisy of Western leaders who have called for Israel to lift restrictions on humanitarian aid entering Gaza. According to Netanyahu, such appeals play directly into the hands of Hamas, the group controlling Gaza, which he claims uses aid and international pressure as shields to continue its attacks on Israel. He suggested that Macron, Carney, and Starmer, by publicly pressing for more aid corridors and criticizing Israeli military conduct, were not merely acting out of humanitarian concern, but were effectively aligning themselves with forces hostile to Israel. This narrative frames Israel as under siege not only from Hamas, but also from a growing chorus of international voices that, in Netanyahu's view, undermine its right to self-defense. The backlash was swift. Diplomatic sources in Paris, London, and Ottawa described Netanyahu's remarks as deeply irresponsible and bordering on slander. Officials across the political spectrum stressed that their countries remain firmly committed to Israel's right to defend itself against terror, but insisted that humanitarian access must be guaranteed for Palestinian civilians caught in the crossfire. They rejected the notion that advocating for basic human rights or the delivery of food, medicine, and water should be equated with support for Hamas. Several foreign ministers went further, suggesting that Netanyahu's rhetoric risks isolating Israel at a time when cooperation and diplomatic engagement are most urgently needed. Arab leaders, too, joined the chorus of condemnation, warning that inflammatory language only deepens mistrust and delays the prospects for peace in the region. Meanwhile, the conditions in Gaza have continued to deteriorate at an alarming rate. Despite international pressure and some loosening of the blockade, only 119 aid trucks have reportedly reached the enclave, a fraction of what is needed to sustain its nearly 2 million residents. The United Nations has described the situation as catastrophic, with widespread reports of malnutrition, lack of clean water, and collapsing medical infrastructure. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres did not mince words, describing this stage of the conflict as possibly the cruelest phase yet. Guterres underscored that the Palestinian people, especially children and the elderly, are paying the highest price, and urged all parties to prioritize civilian protection over military aims. This dire humanitarian reality stands in sharp contrast to Netanyahu's portrayal of the international community's efforts as being hostile to Israel's interests. As the crisis unfolds, the diplomatic repercussions of Netanyahu's accusations are beginning to materialize. Israel's traditionally strong ties with Western powers have already been tested over the course of the Gaza conflict, with debates intensifying over proportionality, accountability, and long-term solutions. The Prime Minister's remarks now risk further straining those relationships, particularly at a time when Israel relies heavily on political support, military cooperation, and public diplomacy from its closest allies. Observers note that such rhetoric not only complicates bilateral relations, but also undermines Israel's broader strategic goals on the global stage. While Netanyahu may be trying to rally domestic support by positioning himself against international criticism, the long-term costs of alienating partners who have historically backed Israel remain uncertain and potentially severe. The unfolding drama between Israel's leadership and key Western allies highlights the fragile balance between national defense, international diplomacy, and humanitarian responsibility. Netanyahu's inflammatory accusations may serve short-term political aims, but they also risk deepening Israel's isolation at a time when global cooperation is essential to resolving one of the most protracted conflicts in modern history. With the situation in Gaza growing more desperate by the day, the international community is faced with a difficult but urgent question. how to uphold human rights and peacekeeping norms without being drawn into political blame games. Do you think Netanyahu's approach strengthens or weakens Israel's position in the global arena? And how should Western leaders respond when humanitarian advocacy is framed as political hostility? If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our latest updates on world affairs. Your voice matters. Join the conversation in the comments below.